Stop. Before I tell you what I walked into that attorney's office and did on a Tuesday morning in November, 11 years after my father looked across the dinner table and told me I would never see a single dollar of the Walker family estate. I need you to sit with something first. I need you to feel what it is to be 24 years old, sitting at a formal dining table in a house with 6 bedrooms and a name, the kind of family that has a name, and hear your father say the words that will quietly organize the next decade of your life. Failures don't inherit, Claudia. That's not cruelty. That's how legacies survive. He said it calmly, the way men say things they've rehearsed into conviction. 11 people at that table. Not one of them said stop. My name is Claudia Walker, and this is the story of what a failure builds when she decides to stop asking permission. Let me tell you about the weight of a family name before I tell you about escaping one. My grandfather, Edwin Walker, built a regional construction and property development company from a single contract in 1961. By the time he died, Walker Group had completed over 200 commercial projects across 4 states and held a property portfolio worth, conservatively, $18 million. He was the kind of man whose obituary ran above the fold. My father, Gregory Walker, inherited the company and the philosophy simultaneously. The philosophy was this: Walkers produce. Walkers do not dabble. Walkers do not experiment. Walkers do not pursue paths that cannot be explained in one sentence at a Chamber of Commerce lunch. My brother, Elliot, became a corporate attorney. Clean, legible, approved. My sister, Diane, married a property developer and joined the family business in a communications role. Adjacent, compliant, approved. And then there was me. I was the one who asked questions Gregory didn't have answers for, who changed her major twice, who left the pre-law track junior year because something about contract tort theory made me feel like I was slowly disappearing, who spent a year after graduation working at a brand consultancy, making $38,000 a year, while I figured out what I was actually built for. In my family's vocabulary, that year was called failing. In mine, it was called learning. The distinction didn't matter to Gregory Walker. What mattered was legibility, and I was not legible. It was the night of my grandfather Edwin's estate reading. Edwin had died 6 weeks earlier, quietly, in the house he'd built in 1974. He left behind a will that divided the estate between Gregory and his 2 sisters, with a portion designated for the grandchildren to be distributed at Gregory's discretion. His discretion. That was the word that should have scared me. Discretion. We gathered for a family dinner the week after the formal reading. Gregory had cooked, which he only did when he was staging something. My mother, Helen, moved around the table serving food with the careful energy of a woman who knows a difficult conversation is scheduled and is trying to soften the room with warmth before it arrives. Elliot was there with his wife, Caroline. Diane was there with her husband, Robert. I was there alone, having driven 3 hours from the city where I was 2 years into a role as a brand strategy manager at a mid-size consultancy, doing work I was genuinely good at for a company that had started to notice. I didn't know what was coming. I should have. Gregory had been watching me for 2 years with the particular expression of a man composing a verdict. After dinner, over the kind of port that comes out for serious conversations, my father opened the folder that had been sitting beside his plate since we sat down. Edwin's discretionary portion, he said, amounts to approximately $340,000 to be divided among the grandchildren. Elliot will receive his full share. Diane will receive her full share. He looked at me. Claudia's portion will be held in reserve indefinitely. I felt the table hold its breath. Indefinitely meaning what? I said. Meaning until you demonstrate the stability and direction that warrants it. He closed the folder. Your grandfather built something real. That money is a continuation of something real. It doesn't go to experiments. I have a job, I said. My voice was very steady. I have a career. You have a position at a company nobody in this room has heard of, doing something none of us can explain, that you've had for 2 years after a year of wandering and 2 major changes before that. He looked at me with the composed disappointment of a man who believes he is being responsible. Failures don't inherit, Claudia. That's not cruelty. That's how legacies survive. 11 people. 11 people in that room. Caroline looked at her port glass. Robert found something interesting in the middle distance. Elliot shifted in his chair. My mother said, "Gregory," quietly, the way she always said his name when she wanted him to soften something without actually stopping it. He did not soften it. I put my napkin on the table. I did not cry. I had learned very young that crying in front of Gregory felt like conceding, and I was not ready to concede anything. "All right," I said. I drove 3 hours back to the city that night. And I decided something on that drive that I have never once deviated from since. I decided to build something so undeniable that the question of worthiness would become embarrassing to have ever asked. I am not going to make this a montage of triumph. Life is not a montage. What I built over 11 years was assembled the way real things are assembled. Slowly, with setbacks, with 2 periods of genuine doubt where I sat on my bathroom floor and wondered if Gregory had been right about me. He was not right about me. Year 1 after the dinner, I was promoted to Senior Brand Strategy Manager. I took on 3 accounts that my director had quietly decided were too difficult. I delivered on all 3. I stopped telling my family about my work because the silence on the other end of those calls was a specific kind of humiliating. Year 3, I was recruited away from the consultancy by a larger firm, Meridian Group, to build their brand strategy division from scratch. I negotiated my own contract. I got almost everything I asked for. I started a division with 2 people and a mandate and a budget that made me slightly nauseous. Year 5, the division had 14 people and had generated $19 million in client revenue. I was made a vice president. I was 34 years old. I called my mother that night. She said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then told me Diane had redecorated her kitchen. Year 7, I was approached by a private equity group that was acquiring a portfolio of mid-market brand consultancies. They wanted someone to oversee brand integration across the portfolio. The title was Chief Strategy Officer. The compensation package had a number in it I had to read 3 times. I took the job. Year 9, I was named to a regional business publication's list of the 40 most influential executives under 45. There was a photograph. There was a profile. There was a quote from me about building things that last. I sent my father a copy. He did not respond. Year 10, my mother called me, not about anything specific, just to talk. It was the first time she'd called without an occasion in perhaps 3 years. She asked about my work haltingly, like someone practicing a language they'd let get rusty. I told her. She listened. When she hung up, she said, "Your grandfather would have been proud of you." I held the phone after she hung up and let myself feel that for exactly as long as it was going to take, which was a while. I was in a strategy review when my assistant interrupted to say, there was an urgent call from an attorney named Gerald Foss regarding the Walker estate. I knew the name. Gerald had handled my grandfather's estate 11 years ago. The fact that he was calling now, urgently, meant something in the structure of things had shifted. I took the call. "Claudia," Gerald said, "I'm reaching out because your father has initiated the formal distribution process for the discretionary portion of Edwin's estate, the portion that was placed in indefinite reserve." My chest went very still. "He's ready to distribute." "He's been diagnosed," Gerald said more quietly. "Early Parkinson's, he's putting his affairs in order." I sat with that for a moment. Gregory Walker, who had always moved through the world with the physical authority of a man who believed his body was an extension of his will. Gregory Walker, putting his affairs in order. "What does the distribution look like?" I asked. A pause. "That's why I'm calling. He's asked to meet with you directly before the formal distribution. He wants the meeting to happen in the family home. He asked if you would come this weekend." I looked out my office window at the city I had built my life in over 11 years. "I'll be there," I said. I drove myself. I always drove myself to that house. Something about arriving in my own car, on my own timeline, under my own power, had always mattered to me in a way I'd stopped trying to explain. The house looked the same. That was somehow the strangest thing. 11 years of my life had reorganized completely around the absence of this family's approval, and the house looked exactly the same. Same gravel drive, same painted shutters, same ostentatious knocker on the front door that Edwin had installed in 1987, and Gregory had never changed because changing it would have felt like a demotion. My mother answered the door. She looked older. She looked like a woman who had been managing someone else's illness while managing her own fear about it, and had not mentioned either to anyone who could help. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that has apologies folded into it that she doesn't yet have the words for. "He's in the study," she said. I went to the study. He was sitting behind the desk he'd sat behind my entire life, but the desk looked different now. Or he did. The authority that had always seemed structural, load-bearing, had shifted into something more provisional. He was still Gregory. But he was Gregory at 71 with a diagnosis and a folder and 11 years of not responding to a magazine profile his daughter had sent him. "Claudia," he said. "Dad." He gestured to the chair across from him. The chair I'd sat in at 9 to be told my grades were acceptable, but not excellent. At 17 to be told my college essay needed to reflect the family's values. At 24 in the dining room adjacent to have my worth formally adjudicated. I sat down. He opened the folder. The discretionary portion, with 11 years of managed investment growth, currently stands at $487,000. I said nothing. "I want to give you yours," he said. "Your full share with the growth." He slid a document across the desk. I looked at it, didn't touch it. "I have some things I want to say first," I said. He nodded, the nod of a man who had been expecting this and had decided to accept it. "I want to show you something," I said. I opened my bag and set 3 things on the desk between us. The business publication profile from year 9. A 1-page summary I'd prepared of my division's 11-year revenue record, and a photograph. He looked at the photograph first. It was from my company's last all-hands meeting. 43 people on a stage, me in the center. "I built that," I said, "from 2 people and a mandate. Those 43 people have mortgages and children and futures that are partly possible because of decisions I made." He looked at the photograph for a long time. "You called me a failure," I said. My voice was steady in the way it had trained itself to be over 11 years. "In front of 11 people. You withheld my grandfather's money he left for me, because you decided I was an experiment rather than a person. And I want you to know that I built everything I built without a single dollar from this family, not because I didn't need help sometimes, but because accepting help from people who'd formally decided I wasn't worth investing in felt like agreeing with them." Gregory looked at the desk. "I know," he said. "I don't want the money," I said. His head came up. "I'm not refusing it out of anger. I've processed the anger. What I'm telling you is that I don't need it. What I need, what I have needed for 11 years, is something you cannot put in a folder." The room was very quiet. "I need you to tell me," I said, "that you were wrong, not that you're sorry, not that circumstances have changed. I need you to say the specific words, 'I was wrong about you, Claudia.'" Gregory Walker looked at his daughter for a long moment. And then something happened to his face that I had never seen happen to it in 35 years of being his child. It broke, not dramatically, not with weeping. It broke the way things break that have been under pressure for a long time, quietly and completely. "I was wrong about you," he said. "I was wrong. You were never a failure. You were someone I didn't know how to see, and I was too proud to learn how." I sat with those words. Let them land in the place they'd been needed. "Thank you," I said. I picked up the document. I signed it, not because I needed it, because my grandfather Edwin had left it for me, and it was mine, and Gregory did not get to decide that anymore. She was making tea the way she always made tea during difficult things, with the focused attention of someone who needs their hands to be doing something useful. He talked about that magazine profile, she said, without turning around. The one you sent. He read it 6 times. I know because I counted the times he left the study and came back. I stared at her back. He showed Gerald Foss, she said, his attorney. He said, "This is my daughter," and Gerald said he knew because it was a good profile, and your father said, she paused. He said she got that from her grandfather. I sat down at the kitchen table. Why didn't he call me? I said, not angry, genuinely asking. My mother set down the kettle and turned around and looked at me with the eyes of a woman who has spent 40 years loving a proud man and understanding the cost of that more than anyone. Because calling you meant admitting he'd been wrong for 11 years, she said, and your father would rather carry the wrong than say it out loud. Until now, I said. Until now, she agreed. She sat across from me, put her hands over mine. There's something else, she said, something I should have told you years ago. Her hands tightened slightly. About why your father was so afraid of what you were doing, about what happened to him when he was 24. My chest went tight with a feeling I couldn't name. Mom. He left once, she said quietly. Before you were born, before the company, he left and tried to build something of his own, something Gregory's father didn't approve of. I stared at her. What happened? She looked at me with the eyes of a woman who has held a secret so long it has become structural, load-bearing, impossible to remove without understanding what falls. He failed, she said, completely, and his father said the same words to him that he said to you. The kitchen was very silent. Failures don't inherit, I said slowly. He didn't invent that, my mother whispered. He survived it, and he was so frightened of watching you survive it too that she stopped. Her eyes filled. My phone buzzed on the table between us. A text from Elliot, my brother, the attorney, who had sat at that table 11 years ago and looked at his port glass. Claudia, I need to talk to you before you leave. There's something about grandfather's estate that Dad doesn't know I know. Something that changes what that inheritance actually means. Can you come to my car? I looked at my mother. Did you know, I said carefully, that there might be something about grandfather's estate that hasn't been disclosed? Her face told me everything before she said a word. Because she didn't look confused. She looked relieved. Like someone who has been waiting 11 years for the right person to finally ask the right question. What does Elliot know? What has my mother been carrying? And what did Edwin Walker actually leave behind that Gregory never told anyone about? Part 2 is coming, and I promise you, nothing about this family is what it looked like from the outside. But right now, I need you to tell me in the comments, have you ever built something extraordinary in the silence of people who doubted you? Because I want to hear it. Every single one.